choose Spanish translation. Most of the conversation is going to be in Spanish. So if you would like English translation, please choose the interpretation of English at the bottom of the screen. This broadcast is brought to you by A Growing Culture, advancing a culture of farmer autonomy and agroecological innovation. And here's the founder of AGC, Lauren Cardelli.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It is an ultimate honor to be hearing with Eric Jimenez, as well as Rosalia and Lucas from UTT. This is an episode we are really excited about. This is the first time that we have brought in voices from South America on the Hunger for Justice broadcast. And today's episode will be broadcasted in Spanish. This is actually really important because there's something that I've been thinking about a lot. As an organization, we've been having frequent conversations with potential funders, activists, media, and one thing that we hear a lot is that we focus domestically. We're interested in domestic issues. As an organization that works all across the world with Indigenous, smallholder, and peasant farming communities to ignite change and build global solidarity towards a just food system, it's important to recognize that in communities all over the world, they don't have that ability to say, we only think local. We only act local. US policies, US corporate interest have affected the landscape all around the world, where communities are dealt with the reality that America has to be in their narrative. For instance, a few weeks ago, we had a broadcast with the peasant movement of Philippines. The reason why 90% of farmers in the Philippines don't have access to land is because of feudal policies put in place during American colonization. We have a heavy hand in shaping the communities and the realities around the world. It's up to all of us to recognize that and support groups all around the world because our collective liberation is tied to each other. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I am very excited to pass the mic to Eric to introduce UTT for this week's broadcast.
Bueno, gracias, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren. Good morning to everyone. For me, it's a pleasure and an honor. I'm going to share this space with you all and with our comrades from the UTT, the Land Workers Union, that is an organization that works with 15,000 families in Argentina. It works with 200,000 hectares and it produces 60% of food, but they don't have access to land. And also, a large part of them work in an agroecological way without pesticides. And today they're going to explain how this organization works, what is its impact, its mission. And here we have Rosalia Pellegrina, who is the national coordinator and general secretary, and Lucas, who is the coordinator of the national international relations. And without further ado, Rosalia and Lucas, I would like you to introduce yourselves, who you are, how did you become part of UTT, and what is your work? Rosalia, we can start with you. Well, thank you for the invitation. It's very comforting that on the other side, in the other side of America, we're also fighting and we're also transforming and we're also demanding a model of food justice that's healthier, that's more just, and that is fighting for food sovereignty. So thank you for the invitation. that we got from our organization. We're really proud of being here and being able to participate with North America and the people. My name is Rosalia Pellegrini. I am part of the National Coordination of UTT, a coordination that is made up of all of the different secretaries of the organization. I work specifically with the different genders, specifically focused on different genders, as we're saying. It's been doing it for 4 years, working with women farmers from the beginning of the organization, from the start, which has been founded about 10 years ago as a way to respond, collectively respond with organizing for producers and farmers, thinking about maybe you giving a seed to 5 families who are farmers, and we try to understand the access to rights of these families, of these farmer families that are small producers, that is a model that is dominated by the large scale farmers, that in Argentina, they control most of the agriculture. And we didn't have a response to this and to these issues. So from that little seed that we planted, that is really rooted in the territory where UTT was born, and we start growing with adding more families and covering a wider area. It starts as a union with these practices and insists to give support to these small farm worker families through the organization. And at the same time, by being a union, it's also an organization that has a social transformation focus. And it has as a mission the fight for the land, agroecology, and working with gender justice and transformation. And we're working with thousands of comrades in 15 provinces in Argentina, in which where we are fighting and we believe in action in the streets to transform reality. We also strongly believe that the people fight for their rights by fighting. And we started with this struggle through reflection and consistent, and the people reflecting and supporting the families and organizing the families. And we started finding each other and meeting each other with these specific principles of the organization. And what I want to say with this is that the fight for the land and for agroecology, for gender equality, and many other things have been strategies of the UTT, and were born and started through the assemblies, through the organizing work, through growing, was growing in the different territories. And from the beginning, we started working with the struggle and the focus of fighting for the land, which in Argentina, we have a 90% of families who are producers of tomatoes, of greens, of different fruits, and that the entire country consumes. Those families are small producers and small farmers, and there are families that don't have access to land, who depend on renting with high prices in order to be able to keep producing food, but they live in precarious situations in wooden, small, humble homes. And these families are inserted and are part of the production, the food production system, conventional food production, with that characteristics of being peasant farmers that are part of this larger system that we call it an agrobusiness. And as a victim of that agrobusiness, of those markets that have all these intermediaries as part of them. And that's one of our fights for the land. Yesterday, we were in that fight. And Lucas can tell you a little bit more of the actions that we saw, specifically around fighting for land. And this is one of the examples that we've been transforming this organization that from the beginning was a response with very specific asks for the families as a union, but at the same time, moving farther along with strategies of agriculture and what would be the transformation of the production model. And Lucas, if you want to start conversing, we can start exchanging. What do you think? Yes, Ro. Well, first, good morning to everyone, and thank you again for having us and for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to reach so many people that are in different countries, fighting, listening to this conversation. And how are you all doing this? Are we translating? How's the speed? Yes, Luca. What we have to remember is to speak in a moderate pace, to giving the interpreter adequate time to interpret properly. Perfect. Okay. As I was saying, my name is Lucas Perezco. I'm part of the UTT. I live here in San Vicente, in the province of Buenos Aires. And as you know, I'm part of the Secretary General of the International Relations piece with a focus of like the national work of the UTT. And we're here today. We're in 16 provinces, maybe 15, maybe 16. And we said we're 15,000 families that are part of the UTT. And to add to that, adding to what Rosalia was saying, the organization was born 10 years ago, started 10 years ago. And through Varela Sategui in Buenos Aires, in a zone that is some of the most important in Argentina, maybe the most important in terms of production of vegetables, of produce, and where the organization is started, obviously as a response to the needs that the sector had, a sector that's been erased and not given a lot of visibility within our country, that the small farmers have been erased. And as I mentioned the other day, in Argentina, we have a representation of the countryside that the dominant sectors have had the most control, who have committed genocide to the native people, the indigenous people, and the dictatorship of the Macri government, and who have kept the land, who've done an agricultural reform that's been backwards. Instead of distributing, they've monopolized the land, and with the focus not only on production, but also of power, in which in our country, and a lot of countries in Latin America, it's looked that way. And it has to do with strategies of the empire and coordinated by the different empires. And the way that it looked was we started organizing, as Rosalia mentioned, around agriculture, and whether within the organization through the 16 provinces. And obviously, considering the pandemic that is happening right now at a global level, we had more than 400 assemblies in which we were trying to distribute territories, because we organized around what we call the Grassroots Assemblies. The organizing is supported by our base, by our grassroots groups, with our hands in the land, our feet in the land, directly in contact with the land and with the realities. And in that way, not only do we have 400 monthly assemblies, which are initiated by the organization in each of the provinces and each of the other bases that are part of the organization, and keep multiplying. At the same time, we have province assemblies, and we also have regional assemblies, and we all have what we call a board and a meeting that we get together, all the producers, all the farm workers from the entire country, to analyze what's going on politically, the struggle, the tragedies to fight, and to support what our fundamentals are and our pillars of our organization. That is the general secretary, which is Rosalia at the moment, that's working specifically in the gender issues, where women and when we make sure that all the peasant women, farm workers also participate. And then we start building, this becomes part of the foundation of our organization. Other areas that we also have is we have the Agroecology secretary, which is the popular consultation service, which is part of our organization. And we have our attorneys that are also make up part of the organization, and that are all constantly supporting our comrades in the different territories of the country, fighting for access to land, fighting for fighting the different injustices that keep coming up. Because in Argentina, we have a lot of issues with the larger farms, the larger corporations that take over the land and don't allow the peasant farm workers to have access to. And we resist, right? We're always resisting the power, the big power, and to be able to live from the land and in the land. And in large part of our territory is in the hands of not in the hands of a lot of people. It's in the hands of large companies, and only 13% of the smaller farm worker producers, 13% are the ones that have small producers, right? And 70% of us have actual land. Sorry, 13% have actually land, and 70% of us rent. And we're the ones who feed Argentina, who produces the food, and who's providing the food for most Argentinian folks in our country. And we're obviously a sector that produces a lot of food. We do a lot of work. We're a concentrated field that's not based on technology or the large chemical companies or patenting seeds that really interrupt the rights of people and having access to seeds, and loses the farm practices of hundreds and thousands of years that are the farm practices of the land. And we've been a marginalized sector, but we're an important sector that really feeds all of the people of our country. And we're the ones who also generate part of the culture and part of the roots of the country. But at the same time, we're in a very grave situation, difficult situation, that only 8% of the population, of the rural population in Argentina, has access to land, which we have 65% of the land that is farming soy and corn. That's a destruction of the land. And that much land, 60 to 65% of our territory, functions just to export these foods. And who control it, again, are those large sectors that have the power, that are building a country they're building a big country for a small group of people. Yep, as you just mentioned, you work for the large market, works with these large farms that produce that have livestock, and also create issues of pollution. So it's an entire network of the agro business and agro industry that is associated to the global movement and affect the producers, right? And another question, because it's really obvious that the UTT is a radical agro organization that deals with issues around land, but I understand that you also solve practical issues for the farm workers within the market, within communication, with the public. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you ask yourself, the farm workers and producers don't have a lot of time, right? They're busy working hard. And a lot of the time, the issue is that they aren't able to sell their products well. So for me, that's not a service, it's a need. And that's something that you provide for these farm workers. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Yes. Yeah. So the way that you could characterize this model and this food model, this food system, is a food system that is measured, the way that it's measured is to make sure that the money comes into the organization, but at the internal level, people need to eat. People need to continue eating and feeding themselves. And from there, that's where we started strengthening ourselves as an organization with a peasant farm worker fight and mission focused on who we are and that we're the one who feed the people. And that perspective, that radical perspective made us go out in the streets like that and fight this fight. And I wanted to also expand on what Eric was talking about, talking a little bit more specifically around production. And from the organizing work, we started organizing around agroecology, not as a response in the beginning, as we need to do agroecology because we're polluting the land, because we're polluting ourselves, but because the agroecology from the beginning is a response. It's a material response of the dependency on the farm workers and farm producers. It comes from there, from when we built the UTT, that me and Lucas are part of that from the initiation, the beginning. We weren't even talking about agroecology. When we talked about agroecology, folks would get scared because this model, this production model, based on this Monsanto and all these technologies, was integrated into the minds and the culture and the hearts of the farm worker, small producers. So talking about agroecology and talking about not using pesticides, for instance, from the beginning would have been completely rejected. So from there, we started understanding with concrete responses, with organizing work, organizing us as in cooperative models. And in the day-to-day work, we started building a methodology that we didn't create, right? That came also from the Cuban methodology, which is peasant to peasant methodology. Because we understand that an agronomist, educated academic would tell a farm worker, would tell a peasant how to farm, wouldn't work. It needed to grow from the actual peasant farm workers. And that's why we started doing this this popular consultant model. The Secretariat of Production has a role that has this understanding and understands that the farm workers are the ones with the knowledge, right? And that's what the agroecology means, right? To recover, recovering what we used to do 40, 50 years ago, which isn't even that long ago. And in that path, we started understanding that agroecology not only had an impact in the economy of every farm worker family, because those inputs that these corporations, these multinational companies that work with dollars that are really expensive, and that for a farm worker family who's working the land means that they're going to have a miserable economy, right? But not only was agroecology safer, but it was also healthier, and it also formed a different relationship with those foods. And I would hear another a farmer say, agroecology for us was to recover the taste of the countryside, because we had lost that connection with nature of what it meant to be a farm worker, to make food, to grow food, not merchandise, right? And to be able to enjoy the ecosystem and our environment, and to have a relationship, not a relationship based on destruction of production and work, to be able to recover your time off, recover your health. We had a lot of cases of sick children, of women who would lose their babies, their pregnancies consistently. They would have miscarriages because of exposure to pesticides. All of that was really carved our path to create the peasant to peasant methodology. And since we started that, we had these challenges that all these agroecological practices are completely different of the conventional vegetables that tell you a tomato needs to look a certain way, and greens and vegetables need to be bright and big and at a specific color. The agroecological produce is diverse. It comes in different sizes and different colors. All of these foods, we couldn't take it back to the conventional market. So it was the production transformation that really brought us to bring alternative mechanisms to the production, that they went directly from the producer to the consumer. And for us, did not only supported, and not only was it did it make us understand the economic consequences, but it created a connection with the consumer, and it recovered that relationship with the countryside and where you produce these foods, right? Because what this system also includes is disconnecting us from what we're eating and not knowing the food that is being produced, and a lack of understanding that the urban families know what they eat and that it's being produced in a certain way with a specific characteristics and using a specific model. And they don't know how we live, or the people who produce these foods, what kind of conditions we live in. So commercializing from the producer directly to the consumer, along with the UTT, and for instance, the seller that makes that connection, that sells to that consumer, but that also wants to other different markets that want to support agroecological practices, like restaurants, different markets. What also that created was a connection and contact with the people. Not only are you buying a tomato from UTT, but you're also supporting a project that's focusing on food sovereignty, on social transformation, of a dignified life. So you're also supporting these concrete responses that transformed in strategic responses that talk about a good life, living a good life, and also make us discuss these models of what kind of models of life we want. And that's how we started building these responses and these relationships. Rosalia, I think a lot of folks are probably asking themselves here in the North, well, so these agroecological products are more expensive in the market. So how can people access these foods and this healthier food if they don't have the economic means to pay more for a healthier product? How do you solve that issue? Lou, do you want to add anything? Well, obviously, as Rosalia mentioned, agroecology is born from the workers, right? From the countryside that they work in. And it can't be far in that sense, it's not far from that political issues and from that cultural pieces. the workers, the peasant to peasant workers is a political subject. And the food is also related to the political. It's part of our production of our work, and not only as merchandise, as Rosalia was mentioning, but it's part of our culture. It's inherent to our culture. So if we didn't have these focuses and these missions of which why we organize, that we want to that we include in this organization, we could have fallen for the trap of thinking of food that because it's agroecological, we need to get more profit from it, and more than what we consider to be fair. But we think that this food should be accessible to all. The price should be accessible to the working class folks in Argentina, because they're the ones that need to buy these foods. In Argentina, food is really expensive, and it's thought of as not only from the produce and which the main problems are how it's commercialized, the big supermarkets, these distribution models. But there's also other foods like milk, which are coming from this industry that have industries that monopolize these industries, also the meat market and the exporting models that in a few years has shifted. And now we're having large discussions around these agreements also with China, within China and Argentina, of what those relationships will be. We think that agroecology, the way that it's born from the workers, has to be accessible to the workers. And we have multiple strategies. One of them is to have more what we call departments, right? In which we receive the products from the farm workers from all over the countries without an intermediary. And we're building these connections, these chains, and we're trying to make it as fair as possible. The prices are something we agree on, and we agree on them by assemblies and by consensus through people in the organization and the folks who work these specific departments and these markets. The first agroecological market within Argentina are folks, we have youth that work them, and they're the youth of our peasant farm workers, and they're also part of the makeup of our organization. So we believe that we believe in the agroecology, and we create these ties with the people, and we believe that if we can accomplish that the people can eat a more varied diet and have access to healthy food, that's part of our political fundamental construction, because change in Argentina and the world isn't just going to come from one sector. It's going to have to be the workers, and that it reaches the people, and that we understand what we're working from. And so in that way, we believe that agroecology is building that food sovereignty. And because if we don't have agroecology, we don't have food sovereignty, as we always say, because it has to do with breaking these ties that we had to these models of exploitation. And as Rosalia mentioned, that the producer and farm worker becomes enslaved to a big chain, a large chain, where they don't have any vote or say or power or decisions for themselves, right? They are tied to profit and to what's generated, the profit that's generated at the end of their workday by these multinational companies. So agroecology for us, we're not thinking about it so one sector can live without just getting sick, right? We're thinking about all the people. We think about it as a political tool. We think about it as like part of the construction of a more democratic people, and part of that revolution that we started talking about when we first initiated the UTT, and to continue building a more sovereign world, a world that's more grassroots, and that we can build together, and that we're not disconnected from the sectors that are most in need. And that's why building this during the middle of this pandemic, and while we're seeing specifically all the different social and economic differences that this pandemic has really highlighted, which, where we've seen the most poor sectors or town, where as an organization, we started building new tools with direct relationship with those organizations that are in those neighborhoods with the most need, which is a network of that are fighting for food sovereignty. And our strategy is also important. Our strategy is also that folks get the most access to affordable food, and that the people who have the most needs in the different neighborhoods get the food and don't have to work with intermediaries, and can link directly with us as an organization that wants to really build that relationship, and that also is tied and working with the political organizations that are fighting day to day in the different neighborhoods. And that when we find ourselves on the street, or we find ourselves in actions, we're also always talking about what kind of economic model we want in our country. And these are the comrades day to day that are feeding the most poor, and that's where we need to be. And being there for also the preparation of food that provides politically, goes against what has been normalized, and what's created an element, like a false element of, in Argentina, we only eat grains, flour, rice. And we understand that the ministry, for instance, distributes food to the poor, but they're not healthy foods. And what we're missing is exactly that: fresh food, vegetables. So for us as an organization, what we want to create in those spaces is a network of food distribution of food, and dining rooms, dining facilities that we can also feed the folks with the most needs. And because in Argentina right now, there's a lot of variety of produce and fruits that are hidden or are basically erased by these large sectors who want to commercialize the food in Argentina, and who represent the political parties and the sectors that believe that any other issues they can just solve by giving them soy products and flour and rice, and really don't build those healthy relationships. And for us, it's really important to really create that democracy and support all of the different sectors where all the workers are and all the people meet their needs. Okay, thank you, Luca. We're getting some questions from the public, so we wanted to ask you. So the UTT is responding to the conditions created by neoliberalism and the food system that is attached to that. So right now there's a huge need of progressive policies that serve the people. Can you talk a little bit more about your work around public policies in the food system, and from the different projects that you have, and the agricultural forums that you have and you're organizing around? Yeah. To start, we're always looking to to create actions and campaigns that can have demands around who produces the food, who grows the food, and to have a peasant to peasant agenda that's relevant for all the people, not only for the small producer sector, because we understand that the solution to the issues that we have as a people come from the land, and they come from the land until they land on the plate of food that everyone has. And the pandemic also puts a focus, has an influence in that. Like, it makes you think of what's necessary to live. It really gives us perspective as producers of land, as essential workers. We're essential, but it's not essential that we have public policies that are real structural responses to the issues, right? So this starts with the Macri government. We had Mauricio Macri, who was a key piece of neoliberalism in Argentina, and to thinking about the state as a market, right? How to open the market to the corporation and making sure that the corporation is the one who's doing businesses with the goods that are for everyone, right? That means 4 years of going backwards, in which for us, what we wanted to do, as I said in the beginning, we wanted to create an agenda with proposals, with public policies that not only were a response to our sector, but were also responses for all the issues that all Argentinians are facing. So that really created a conversation around the dominant agricultural system and food system. So we created a bill in 2016 to access to land, and this bill up to access to land we started to have an intention to have a distribution of food, a fair distribution to families, where we demanded that all of the food that folks had created a solid business. And this was a law that it could exist within the government. It could exist within like the realm of a reformist government. And we're not just talking about like agricultural reform, but this would be a law. I'm sorry, it's breaking up a little bit. So have resources to pay the wages for and to be able to purchase your own land. That could look like a credit, for instance. This is something that other governments in the past, of Nestor Kirchner and Nelly Cristina, prior governments to Macri, had also created different initiatives to access to living, to housing, with urban credits to be able to have access to housing. So we used those policies that existed in the past, and we created the bill to access to land in 2016. We proposed this bill and this was against a government that was very neoliberal, which the bill made the bill not progress, but we did get a support from the public. And when we presented the bill to access to land, helped us start creating a legitimate transformation with the people. And it looked like us distributing and giving away 20,000 kilos of food, for instance, of people in the street, people without employment, people who didn't have access to food, and we were donating 20,000 kilos of food in the different squares, in the public squares in Argentina. And those initiatives had a lot of impact and started building a very well-loved organization by society, with a strong solidarity, a feeling of solidarity during a time that each moment that we felt the economic crisis, and also talking about who, like asking ourselves the question, who is producing what we eat? So we started from there. We were able to produce different proposals. And last year, we also convened with all of the farm worker organizations and small to medium farm workers, and we invited them to a forum for a popular sovereign forum that we had more than 3,000 people participate, and it was a pillar in the history of the farm worker struggle, because we were able to hear all the experiences from 1930s, experiences that folks had from farm worker organizations and groups that were able to exist through the militarized dictatorship. And we were able to hear all the stories. And we were able to, and from there, we were able to unite everything with the UTT. And we created 21 points of an agricultural program that has as a focus sovereignty. As Lucas mentioned, in a country with an agricultural model that is focused on exportation in the ports and dominated by multinational corporations, but also we could say that Argentina was funded that way. It was funded in an agricultural an agricultural model that's based on exportation. So thinking about this model that only focuses on corporations and the big business. So for all of us to organize ourselves, the small farmers, middle-sized farmers, thinking about public policies that are focused on the production on fruits, on meats and vegetables. What do we do with our land? What do we do with water? What do we also do with grains and the large scale productions? And being able to have those conversations was historic. So there we were able to create a program that talks about a different type of agriculture that's built by the other sector, the sector that really feeds people. Thank you very much. Now that I have you here, I need to ask about the gender program. Can you talk a little bit more about the gender justice work? Yes, that's also really important. And I so much that I didn't even know how to bring it up right now, but I do want to give you an overview of what we're doing. Well, the gender secretary and the gender perspective in the UTT was founded by the women's groups. And I think it's really how feminism comes up in different spaces, right, around the world. Women who are land workers getting together, sharing their experiences, their roles, and from there, making what was always natural. In the field, there's a lot of machista, chauvinist, and practices, and we see a lot of gender violence and oppression. There's a lot of cases of gender violence within the organization because we exist within the society that is very common in. And we have as a focus wanting to transform and to give legitimacy to the women farm workers and to be able to be strengthened. And we're able to combat the different forms of violence that we're experiencing. And we created a group of the rural women farm workers, which is a group of peasant farm worker women that were trained to be more conscious, to be able to fight this, to create a law of violence against women. And we started creating also a long-term vision with a feminist perspective in all of the aspects of the organization, specifically around production. We started noticing that this production model that we keep talking about and discussing since we started having these conversations that are connected to the land, and that, and that the one that exists that's connected to merchandise has a patriarchal perspective and has a relationship to the patriarchy with the woman farm worker and with nature, and that understands that in this model we need to poison the earth, we need to kill pests to get the most profit and the most production. And unfortunately, within families, there's a lot of men are educated this way. And so, so men kept initiating these models and this focus on profit. But within this machismo, we also found allies, right? Because we understood that agroecology also had a gender perspective that talk about taking care of the ecosystems and taking care of nature, and how the role of women and their influence on what to grow and how to grow it, and that voice is fundamental. And even the men, which is what I was talking about, also have been organizing themselves with this gender perspective. Thank you. And we have a question from the audience here that's related. What work does the UTT do with the indigenous movements, with the foods, with the traditional foods? Is there a relationship there that exists with the UTT and that work? There is some work within the UTT by our comrades that are connected with the original peoples, Aymayla, Quechua, Nopotec, Guaraníes, Diaritas. This is work that is part of the organization with the focus on decolonizing. Well, we've been doing this work for 2 years. We've been doing this work for 2 years, and we had the first encounter that was focused on the Quechua language, and the elderly and seniors within the community organized the elders and the seniors within the community that spoke Quechua and was connected to the folks in Bolivia and other provinces. And we had a conference where the elderly were able to share their histories and anecdotes. They shared music. They shared typical foods. And it was a seminar that had a lot of content around the discussions on how to preserve the indigenous cultures. And that was the first step in the discussions within the organization. And from there, we started talking about how we continue to build with Native folks and with indigenous people, and also include cultural diversity, where the majority of the organization, about at least 30% of the organization is made up of indigenous people. And this happened in Santiago de Tero, but also we had another meetings here in Buenos Aires. And the indigenous people's culture is present in all the regionalities, in all the bases of the country. Sometimes we see it in a burial or a celebration in a birthday. Sorry, when we're talking about Pachamama, Mother Nature, that exists within our culture. And this is one of the focuses of the organization that we've been focusing in the last few years, to be able to not only decolonize, but also to make sure that our comrades who are a part of indigenous groups are also present, because it's very unfortunate of what's happened in Argentina, that at one point the original languages were prohibited. There was and to the point where even the children of these indigenous people were being punished for speaking their native languages because of the larger prohibition by the country. And because they thought that if they did speak their native tongue and their native languages, they weren't going to find jobs, they were going to have opportunities. And it was really difficult, really hard, specifically within the realms of farm worker and peasant work. So we presented a petition so that Quechua is being taught in all of the areas, all of the schools of Santiago de Terro. And we were also making sure that we have, within these seminars that we have different professors and folks that speak the native tongue, but also teach about that, and we can continue building that sector within our organization. Thank you, Lucas. We are running out of time, comrades, but I wanted to share my gratitude for everything that you shared with us. What I've learned from this throughout this conversation and how key the peasant farm worker sector is when it's organized within an agricultural project that doesn't just focus on the countryside, right? But also really wants and creates a transformation throughout the entire society. I think you all have given me a really great example of how important the peasant farm worker is for the world. Thank you so much. And if there's nothing else that you'd like to contribute, I wanted to make sure to give you the space to close out. Any last comments? And then we're gonna say our goodbyes. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to share. And we go continue building this other world that's part of our objectives with the focus of food sovereignty. And I want to send my greetings and make sure that we continue focusing from the ground up, from the people to people, for a dignified life, for a good quality of life, and a hug to everyone. Thank you so much. A hug back.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This was absolutely incredible. I think it's really important for us all to understand the contribution of the peasant food web, how smallholder farmers all around the world only occupy 19% of agricultural land, yet produce food for about 70% of the world's population. This is transformative because when we talk about efficiency, when we talk about scale, a lot of times the narratives that we're using are further perpetuating the kind of extractive and linear thinking that industrial agriculture sows. This is absolutely essential to understanding our food system. We are not part of a food chain. We are food chained. I am so grateful for Eric to moderate this conversation today. Eric has been a major inspiration for me for years, and I've enjoyed cultivating that relationship. So thank you so much, Eric. Lucas and Rosalia, you guys are new to us, but we are so excited to be working with you both down the road, collaborating. And as I said in the opening, America's policies, America's corporations, America's interest affects the world. For so many communities around the world, they are combating the systemic neoliberal policies that we are promoting around the world. It's important for us to recognize that. It's important for us to understand how to be advocates, how to be allies, to not just run to consumer privilege or to a sense of supporting just through the market space, but standing out further and advocating for these groups' existence. Agroecology Fund partnered with us from this broadcast. This is the last of 4 episodes that we did to partner with Agroecology Fund. Agroecology Fund is an amazing organization that supports groups like this all around the world because they understand that our liberation is tied to theirs. They understand the crucial role that peasants, Indigenous, and farmers play in shaping our food system. And agriculture has been a 10,000-year journey on the objectification of those communities. So it's time for us to start and give a chance to these communities and build a food system that is not only sustainable, but equitable for all. So thank you, UTT, for this unbelievable lesson. Thank you, Eric, for helping support and drive this conversation. And we look forward for every one of you to follow and support today's speakers. Follow them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Go to their website, reach out. Eric has amazing books you all should read. If you haven't read, I don't know why you're here, because you should just go home and read them. Everybody, next week, we will be having another broadcast. It's every Friday, so tune in at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Support the broadcast. Go to growingculture.org/donate or follow Growing Culture for updates. I want to thank everybody for coming out. We've had comments from Brazil to Uganda. We are a global movement. And finally, a special thank you to our sponsors, Milgram & Dascom Law Firm and Eat Your Way Clean. Please reach out for collaborate. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lauren.
Gracias, Eli.
Gracias, compas.
Gracias, Loren. Gracias a todos.
Okay.
Chao.
Yeah.
Chao.